the Finance Committee meeting of Monday, June 10th, 2024, and ask Dave to please call the roll.
Council President Figueroa Cole.
Here.
Alder Revere.
Here.
Alder Curry.
Here.
Alder Madison.
Here.
Alder Evers.
Here.
Alder Rummel.
Present.
Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. All right. We have no general public comment. So are there any disclosures or recusals on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. So we'll start out by noting that items 17 and 18 will be excluded from the consent agenda. We have no registrants wishing to speak on any items. Are there items that members of the Finance Committee would like to have excluded from the consent agenda at this time? Alder Revere.
Thank you, Mayor. Like separation, please, on agenda items 11 and 12.
Items 11 and 12 will be separated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any additional items that folks would like separated? Going once, going twice, seeing none. And President Figueroa Cole, can I get a motion on the balance of the agenda with separation on items 11, 12, 17, and 18?
Move to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt the balance of the agenda. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor on those items with their recommendations. And go to items. Alder Revere, would it be appropriate to take up items 11 and 12 together?
Yes, please.
All right, so we'll take up items 11 and 12. Item 11 is Legistar 83632, which is amending sections of the Madison General Ordinances to update the city's large item collection and electronic waste recycling ordinances. And item 12 is Legistar 83634, approving the large item collection and electronic waste recycling policy. On items 11 and 12, President Figueroa Cole, a motion, please.
Motion to adopt.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to adopt 11 and 12. Alder Revere, questions?
Yes, please. Appreciate Superintendent Romines being with us, and especially appreciate his patience as this, as my colleagues probably recall, was added as a referral at the last council meeting. So, Charlie, I think it would be helpful if you could just provide an overview for the committee as to what these two companion agenda items seek to accomplish, with an emphasis on what's new versus what we're simply codifying in law. That's
certainly
current policy. Yeah,
certainly. And I'll also let you all know that Jose Maria Donoso is here from Building Inspection. He can certainly speak to certain aspects of this better than I can. I will provide an overview. So essentially, there's, I'll say, two key tenets to what we're doing here. We have 3 to 4 dozen locations across the city of larger apartment or condo complexes that we'll say are frequent flyers towards perhaps maybe misuse would be the best way of describing the current large item collection process whereby work orders are generally not put in or put in only weeks later after a complaint that arrives either with streets or BI or with the older in some cases. And so we're attempting to put some planks in the deck, if you will, to allow building inspection to handle that more effectively and efficiently. I would say the bigger piece that we're looking at here, though, really is who we service, what type of residential units we service. As many of you are likely aware, in the city, we collect trash and recycling carts from 8 units and smaller, with some, although very few exceptions. That's it. However, large items, which are items broadly defined as items that won't fit into a collection cart, will collect from anyone. And really what we're bluntly experiencing is the tremendous growth in the city is outstripping our ability to keep up. And it's not realistic that we're going to have any way to bring in resources to bear to keep up with that. And so what this attempts to do is say, look, for 9 units and larger, the ones we largely already do not service for trash and recycling, we get out of the business of servicing those for large items. And to put that into perspective, just since 2019, we've added 500 units a year that we provide all services to, not just large items. That's 500 a year. For 9 and larger, we're adding 2,500 units a year, right? The city is pushing towards these larger complexes, more dense housing. And so it's not just about what we're doing now, but it's where that growth is, where we're seeing that acute growth and what type of property types, and should we really be servicing those? And so, and why selecting those versus single family homes? There's a few reasons. One, those locations by and large use the service more. The stops tend to take longer, because in many cases, what we're picking up is not always a sofa. It's a move out. And so it's much more material, much more often. And in some cases, right, we are clearly part of the business plan that instead of that property manager or landlord handling items that should be dumpstered or should be done through a private already, they just send it out to the curb. And oftentimes it's not even large items. It's just easier for them in some cases to have the city do it. And so we actually pretty rarely see that in smaller units comparatively. And so, I mean, I can go on as needed, but that's really what we're looking at. And I guess the last thing I would add, we're spending about, just from collecting at the curb, I believe we would be freeing up about 100 to 125 slots a week for 8 units and smaller to use if we clear out the 9 units and larger. We currently provide 600 work order slots a week. Those are always full. And in most weeks now, we're having to push people who put in work orders on Wednesday, certainly by Thursday, out the following week. 3 years ago when we started this, that was actually pretty rare. And a lot of that is coming from that incredible growth the city is seeing. And we're trying to start to make some decisions on what we can do about it. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Charlie. I certainly have some follow-up questions, but Jose Maria, were you planning on presenting at all? Because I don't want to lose sight of you or move on to more specific questions if you were going to help us provide an introduction. And
Yeah,
thank you
sure.
for joining us. I know it's not often you're at the Finance Committee.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Jose Maria Donoso, Housing Inspection Supervisor with Building Inspection. I can talk about the enforcement actions for this new ordinance. The new ordinance is going to be in Chapter 27, the Minimum Housing and Property Maintenance Code. It's really short and sweet and with a lot of meaning. Basically, it says that large items cannot be placed on the terrace except temporarily for collection. As any other enforcement action for minimum housing, we will start with the educational part. That is basically the official notice, the document that lists any violation to the ordinance, stating what is the violation and what you need to do to remediate that. Usually those notices we mail to the property owners with a due date of around 10-15 days. By the due date, the property owner need to be in compliance with the notice. If not, we will issue a citation. The first offense is $100, that for the property owner will be $187, and we will inform streets that we issue a citation and they can proceed with the collection. If the property is a frequent flyer, we call frequent flyers when we receive the same complaint, in 6 months. If that is the case, we will issue a second citation. It's not going to be an official notice because the educational part is already passed. And that second violation or subsequent violation will be $200. That to the property owner will be $313. So that is basically what we are planning to do. And I don't know if you have any questions about the enforcement that we do.
Well, thank you, Jose Maria.
Sure.
I don't know if it would be you or Charlie that would like to address this, but along those same lines, could you be more specific as to what the proposed increase in penalties in this proposal would do versus what existing law is in the minimum housing code?
Yeah, so at this point, usually we write under chapter 10. Is some right now I think the first violation is 124 that we talk in one of the several meetings that we have about it. That is probably too low for start citation, as all of these properties, they are basically rental units mainly with 9 and more units. So that will be the difference in the amount of the citation, the penalties. Do you want to add
and Jose
something
Maria,
else?
I believe the other thing that we're able to do is kind of speed up the process too, from the time a complaint comes in to a time that action can be taken and we collect the item.
Yeah, it will speed up in some ways, but yeah, it will speed up in some ways. Hopefully, they start learning, and they start doing what they need to do and hire somebody who can pick it up, the large items for them. But it's in many cases, more than speed up the process, it's probably, hopefully, we will not see properties with a lot of large items frequently, or with longer periods of time with the items on the terrace.
Yeah, thank you. Could again, the two of you then, again, I'm not saying who's the best to answer these questions, so whoever wants to, please just respond and jump in. And Charlie, obviously you and I spoke privately about this when I first became aware of this being introduced on the draft city council agenda. And as you already shared with the committee, first and foremost, it sounded like the rationale was this relatively small group of problem properties, so-called frequent flyers of a few dozen. Could you share with the committee what you shared with me, some more specific characteristics of those problem properties? From my recollection, it was self-storage facilities and multifamily buildings that numbered in some significant number of units in the number of the hundreds. Is my recollection correct?
So, Alder Revere, certainly the business type we struggle with the most is the storage units, who again seem to have part of their business plan when they clear those units out to drop items to the curb, and have the city collect those. And at times they're full blocks as high as your chest. It's really quite incredible to see. From a residential standpoint, the problem locations tend to be locations that do not quite meet the city's NRT criteria. As many of you on this call may be aware, the streets division, as much as we can, although we are certainly being stretched within those NRT areas, about every 2 weeks, work order or not, we do go street to street in those blocks and collect large items that are there in support of the city's NRT efforts. And so when we speak of the 3 dozen, maybe 4 dozen at the most, locations where we struggle as a city as far as just not complying with the current setup, it tends to be not geographical near NRT, but near NRT where the resident 9 and larger just aren't quite in those NRT areas, but that their landlords or property management don't seem to want to follow the current protocol of being proactive with putting in work orders and working with their tenants to understand the current process. And so what happens is those items tend to accumulate at the curb until other residents in the neighborhood or community complain and start the process.
Yeah, thank you. As you were developing the policy, did you consider, rather than the wholesale revision of this longstanding city service that we've provided to all of our constituents, especially the majority of Madison residents that reside in multifamily buildings, did you consider kind of a stopgap proposal where we would increase the penalties, the enforcement tools and so forth, but then perhaps also change our policy and say that self-storage businesses are no longer eligible for large item collection, or other properties that are a characteristic of, say, X number of hundreds of units or that sort of thing, rather than doing the approach that's before us today?
Sure. Lots of options were considered. When we first started looking into this, it was really a matter of primarily trying to clean up those locations that aren't working well within the current system. To be clear, there aren't enough commercial issues, business issues that would make that big of a difference. They're just, as well as the 36 or so residential properties that are problematic that we wanted to get cleaned up. And that was the genesis of the consideration. The more we looked into this, the more we started analyzing the data and realizing beyond that, we just have a unsustainable service level for large items in the city. And that we had to start looking at appropriate ways to scale our ability to provide this service appropriately. And it seemed logical that since we do not collect trash and recycling from 9 and large items, which are essentially, they are just trash and recycling that doesn't go in carts, looked like a good place to draw a line, especially when you consider those are the types of units that traditionally are going to have some type of property management, whether it's on-site, off-site, versus, say, a single-family home and whatnot. I'd point out we're still allowing these locations to use the terrace. They have 48 hours to put their large items out to the terrace. If an additional dumpster or enhanced dumpster service aren't options for them. But as far as it goes, I mean, I just to be blunt with the group, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to continue to provide trash and recycling for cart customers. I'm trying to figure out how we're going to continue to provide any number of services we provide in the streets division. In a city that continues to grow rooftops that must be serviced by my division, with resources that just can't grow to meet them. Everybody expects their trash and recycling collected, right? Everybody expects their snow plowed. Like, we grow very closely one-to-one with the city, and we're going to be making a lot of tough resource decisions, not just in the city, but specifically to streets. This is the first.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that. And I see there's other colleagues in the queue that answer questions, so I think I'll yield after this question to those. I would say this question shares a preamble to the question that it seems to me in the last 3 years since we changed our policy, which I supported and realized that it was hard to defend having diesel trucks rolling every block of the city in search of large items. But anyway, admittedly, though, since that's occurred, there has been a lot more material piling up on the curbs. And it's a constant frustration for me downtown. I will say it's been a frustration that I'm not able to be more helpful in terms of getting these large items in the queue to be collected and so forth. So anyway, I could I just maybe, Jose Maria, you're the best one to answer this question. Would you concur that besides these problem addresses that Charlie in particular has mentioned a few times, that we are seeing a lot more large items anecdotally on the terraces throughout the city that are not utilizing the current work order policy?
I think in general, probably yes. Even that we are doing this for a couple of years now, I believe some people, they don't know how to fill a work order. Or we are still receiving calls saying, hey, when the truck is going to be in my neighborhood, So, but I think, the system is good for the city. Maybe new residents, they don't know how to do the work order and things like that. In the downtown, the change of residents over there, a lot of turnovers over there. But probably, with issues in these 8 and 12 properties around the city, I hear things like we are not us, is other people that they illegally dump large items here, things like that. That is something that I hear too. But now I think with the new system or with the new proposals, all the property that they are 9 units and over, they hopefully they educate their tenants, they educate their residents, and they need to have a plan, to don't do what are they doing now, and do not relying in the city. They need to rely in their own tools that they have to comply with the ordinance. So
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you, Jose Maria.
sure.
And thank you, Mayor. I might circle back for some follow-up questions later, but I'll yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Rommel?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not quite sure who can answer this question, but reading the drafter's analysis, I understand why there's, a new section in chapter 27, as well as what's previous in chapter 10. But help me understand why the fees are different and the categories are somewhat different. Is there a rationale for that?
For the fees in chapter 27, that's basically aligned with other violations that we cite for ordinances in chapter 27. So the big difference is that some they start in $50, that is $124 to the property owner. We start for this one. We believe that it's better to start a little bit higher than that, but it's very common in chapter 27 to see those kind of fines in our chapter.
And Alder Rummel, I would just add, in working with Assistant City Attorney Visti putting this together, he felt that moving it to chapter 27 would allow us to work with the properties more quickly and hope, and the expectation is to drive compliance quicker. If they can't do it through education and a willingness to work with Jose Maria and his folks, then fines escalate more quickly and make it financially more viable for them to do what they should be doing rather than what's happening now, which is mostly turn a blind eye to what's going on because it's financially in their best interest to act like they don't know what's happening in some cases, certainly not all, and allow this and have the city just collect the items from the terrace. And that's really what we're trying to get out of, because the previous in chapter 10 just doesn't work. It's not working.
Thanks, but it still looks like, the depositing large items without approval at Curb Terrace in chapter 10.18 at the second go around is 300, but in chapter 27, large items on the terrace, the second violation is $200. Like, did you discuss making them the same amounts across the type of incident it is versus the location in the chapters?
So the intention was to move towards enforcement under chapter 27. That allows us to move more quickly and gain compliance more quickly than what is happening under chapter 10. So the intention is to enforce under chapter 27.
And also, I believe something that we discuss as well is around the city we have some condominiums, and it's and also a lot of property that they are tenant occupied, and we believe that maybe is the right amount to at least to start this. So
Well, I just keep noting there's a discrepancy that I don't hear any answer for. But okay, my second question is the $100 for the first offense cover the cost of the service of going out there and, when you get the complaint? Is it enough?
No.
What would be your estimate of the cost of that service?
Boy, Alder Rummel, I can appreciate the question. It varies so widely based on how much is placed at the curb. Sometimes, I guess I should amend what I said. If it's a couch, it can certainly cover that. But so often what we see in these instances, somebody has moved out and it's 13 bags of trash. It's a desk, 3 chairs, a computer table, so in some cases where it's a very small item drop, sure, it would cover, but in many cases it doesn't. But again, the idea behind what we're trying to set up is really just to move them into complying with the system, which we hope is to move them into private hauling, whether that is a dumpster service or still placing items at the terrace and having a private hauler scheduled to come get it, not to be overly punitive or to recover our costs. And in truth, we have to be very careful tying cost recovery in this realm because of state law on what we're allowed to do in cost recovery around garbage or trash collection.
Which I imagine is why the city attorney has his hand raised to weigh in.
Just one more question before we let the city attorney to help me understand. There's an editor's note under this, the grid with the rates, and it says the bail deposits must be approved by the municipal judge. So there is that kind of step where the judge may forego some of these, depending on, like, it's a couch, not like a whole terrace full of stuff, presumably. But Attorney Haas, I now yield to you to help me understand.
Thank you, Alder. A couple points on that last point you made. Under the city ordinances, what the municipal judge is approving is what this forfeiture would be in the statute, not what is imposed in individual cases. So the judge has the ability to say, in this big scheme of things, under the court forfeitures, this is an appropriate range of forfeiture or not. Secondly, I just, in addition to what Charlie said about recovery, the forfeiture, any forfeitures recovered as part of a municipal court citation, prosecution, those go into the general fund. So it's not like streets would be getting this $100 or whatever the forfeiture is. That goes into the general fund as part of the what's recovered as in municipal court prosecution.
Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just add quickly to what Charlie was saying. There are 5 covered services under the levy limit that if the city has a fee to collect or to cover some or all of the cost of that activity, the levy limit's reduced dollar for dollar by the revenue collected from that fee. And one of those covered services is garbage collection.
Thank you, Dave. They get us coming and going. Thank you, Alder. Are there any additional questions for staff on items 11 and 12? Alder Verveer.
Thank you. Mayor, I was wondering, Charlie, as you know, I'm very concerned about this change in policy, and I'll get into all that under discussion. But I'm wondering, would it be helpful, do you believe, if the council, I realize this isn't what you'd want to have happen, but if the council shares my concern about this change in policy occurring this year, would it be helpful if we adopted the balance of these sister agenda items in terms of increasing the penalties and so forth, and codifying the policy that's been approved thus far prior to today by the council?
So I want to make sure I understand what you're saying, Alder Revere. So you're saying basically, if everything except excluding nine and over from the policy is something that the council approves, is that helpful?
Correct.
Sure, it's helpful. It'll certainly be appreciated from our staff's standpoint, to hopefully help clean up some of the issues that they face on a regular issue. I suspect it will be appreciated from the residents in those areas that have to look at that mess on a pretty regular and routine case, regularly and routinely. I think what it will probably mean, Alder, is that it will be part of budget discussions and what we do with large items going forward. And so it may just forestall the conversation, a bit longer. Part of the reason I wanted to bring it forward now and then have it begin in, let's say, December or January, is it would give us 4, 5, 6 months to work with those larger properties and let them know this change is coming, and have it in place. But ultimately, if the policymakers want to go a different direction and kind of split those off, it is a small step in the right direction. And like I said, certainly appreciated from our staff who haul it and from the residents who see it on a regular basis.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. It has been moved and seconded. If there's no other questions for staff, then is there discussion? Alder Revere? Thank
you again, Mayor. And I want to appreciate Charlie and Jose Maria once again as well. Thank you for being here and for all that you do. Charlie, I just want to say further at the outset, as I've shared with you and as I shared with Mayor in a conversation the other day, in my book, you win the prize for proposing efficiencies and trying to economize amongst all of your peers. And I mean, no offense, obviously many of your fellow division department heads are in this meeting, but I appreciate you and I appreciate that you're always looking for ways to, as I say, become more efficient and economize. And it's something that, especially if a referendum is not adopted by the voters this November, we will have to do in spades. And I fully realize that. So, Mayor, as you know, I am very concerned about this, what I consider abrupt wholesale change in a traditional city service that has been provided to our constituents for lifetimes, generations. I realize that perhaps it doesn't seem like a big deal on the surface, so I'd ask you all to consider the following. Whether you live in a multifamily building currently, as I do, I'm sure all of you did at some point in your lives, and I just ask that you think about those buildings, and it's something you don't think about very much, but the refuse and recycling facilities and the space to handle large items. Think about if you were disposing of a sofa, would it actually fit in a dumpster in the multifamily building that you currently reside in or formerly resided in? I would say not. when you think about the waste haulers that have served the multifamily buildings where you might have resided, do you remember ever seeing equipment that could handle a sofa? I think not. The city streets division has long had so-called clam trucks that easily pick up these large items. They simply can't be thrown in a dumpster generally, and then have the regular refuse trucks or recycling trucks, in the case perhaps of metals, to pick up those dumpsters into the air and throw them into the back of their trucks. This requires a lot of specialized equipment. This requires a lot of sea change on the part of property managers in our community. This is a dramatic change for the majority of our residents that do reside in multifamily buildings, be they apartments or condominiums. Since this proposal came to my attention, I've asked various questions of folks that I think will be impacted. And to a person, my fears have become true. So at neighborhood association meetings, for example, I've asked my constituents in the last couple of weeks, how do you have your large items currently serviced? And this is a combination of folks that live in apartments and live in condos. And to a person, they knew what our policies were. They knew to go online. Admittedly, these are folks that are that have the interest in being neighborhood aware, active in neighborhood associations. So I get that part of it. But anyway, they confirmed for me that we know of no private waste hauling company in our community today that provides these services, at least to any downtown properties. They just don't. Everybody relies on the streets division to do this, and has long relied on the streets division to do this. I've asked, do you have room in your trash and recycling rooms to accommodate large items to store them? Oh, no, absolutely not. We have trash chutes, that most of us use to put the trash in the refuse dumpsters, for example. There's no room in our trash rooms to do any of this. I asked very large property management companies in the last few days, what are your current policies? What do you do? Among those I talked to was the owner of Madison Property Management, Jim Stoppel. He reported to me of the almost 5,000 or so units that they manage for hundreds and hundreds of different property owners, some very small mom and pop landlords with one property, or very large high-rise buildings, that they have no company that will come to any of those properties and remove the large items. They depend on the city streets division, and their management company tries their best to educate the tenants as to what their responsibilities are in terms of getting the large items collected. Urban land interests. I can look out the window of my condo right now and see several urban land interests owned and operated buildings. I spoke with them the other day, and each of the 11 properties that they manage to a building, they use the city streets division for these large item services. Now, I realize that we can increase the rents can be increased on our constituents to try to provide private services in lieu of the cities providing these services for the taxes that they pay through their rent, or the taxes that those of us in condos pay directly to the city. But it certainly is passing the buck and passing the cost on and removing the basic city services that our community has come to rely on. I presume if we surveyed our constituents, they would list public safety, police, fire, and streets as being, again, not all, but most, as being the services that they think they rely on and count on the city to provide for them, and hope that they will provide in the future. But this is a huge change. And I'm not just speaking parochially for those of us downtown. It is a significant change, I would say, for every single building in the city that has long relied on large item collection. I appreciate that the proposal assumes that this is a big deal change, and we need time to allow for this change if it's adopted by the council at a future council meeting, and thus the effective date of November 1. But it seems to me that won't even provide us enough time if indeed the waste haulers companies in our community, for example, don't have the clam trucks, aren't able to easily remove the large material from the terraces, as our own employees expertly have done for all these many decades. It's going to be very hard. You could say, well, they can always just take it to a drop-off site. That policy is not proposed to be changed. Those of us that live in multifamily buildings could still go to a drop-off site. True, but certainly not all of the residents in our community that reside in buildings have access to vehicles, or even more so vehicles that can accommodate something like an old sofa or couch. And certainly charities like St. Vinny's aren't interested in the furniture that is not in decent condition to resell for their charitable work. So I think that this is something that we absolutely should not rush into whatsoever. If this proposal was in Charlie's operating budget request submitted to the finance department this summer, I would not have been shocked at all, knowing that we're going to have very likely, two levels of operating budgets, kind of concurrent budgets, assuming a referendum might be adopted in November, and assuming that one might not be. And that latter draconian, horrific budget of reducing basic city services, I would fully assume something like this might be included in that proposal, but not now, not when we don't need to do it. I just think it's wholly premature. What I would propose to do is ask, as you can probably guess based on my last question, that we pass as soon as possible the additional tools to our staff to deal with these handfuls of problem properties. And I realize that in talking to Charlie and that the properties that are problematic are largely in a handful of Alder districts, especially Alder Fields and Alder Madisons. I can't say that I have the junkyard type atmosphere downtown, fortunately, except once a year in August when so many leases turn over simultaneously. But I think that the additional tools that are included in this proposal, along with working with those handful of bad actors, and perhaps even going further by, for example, prohibiting self-storage warehouse operations from utilizing streets division services as part of an alternate or substitute proposal, and embedding that in this new policy is something that we should do as a first step, not wholly trying to address this problem with these handfuls of properties by adversely impacting everybody, including those that only use the service maybe once every few years. It just doesn't seem necessary or appropriate at this time. So I would like us, and I won't make a motion yet, but I would like us to refer this matter. It is being referred to two other city committees. We're the first committee to consider this. I would ask that it be referred so that we can work on an alternate or substitute and bring it back here that would accommodate, again, everything except this wholesale change of removing all service in terms of large item pickup of multifamily buildings at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Madison?
Thank you, Mayor. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So I do want to just say a huge thank you to Charlie, Jose Maria, and the City Attorney's Office for all the time to work on this. I can say specifically for my district, I started counting, I don't know, somewhere around maybe January 2023, how much time I was spending just on large item pickup complaints and trash building on, certain street corners or cross sections where condos are in a district. And once I surpassed maybe 32, 33 hours, I just stopped because I was like, this is just a normal, regular headache. So I'm going to just stop tracking it. So I appreciate that. So the amount of time I've spent has included phone calls, emails, an organized neighborhood walk to deal with the issue to a degree as well. And I know Alder Rivera mentioned some things about education early on, and no amount of education, for example, has resolved some of this. And I can't say that it's on purpose that it's not resolved, if it's intentionally not resolving it, but it hasn't been resolved. The other thing I do want to say is I actually do live in a huge complex. I think there's between 200 and 300 units in my building. And how we resolve the issue is that early on, it's my assumption that folks might have complained about like the dumpster being filled, and the folks ordered, I think, 2 more trash, like those large bins for furniture. And so now we know when our dumpsters are emptied and the best day to put large items in those dumpsters, for example. So now we don't have the issue of where do we put our old beds or couches. And this is the same education that we have tried to impart on some building property managers, whereas the building that I live in, they actually took that advice, did the thing. Other property managers, for whatever reason, intentional or not intentional, don't take that advice and continue to allow the problem to build up. And in some respect, I believe they are intentionally building up the issue. It's not just like random people are coming to this corner and dumping things. I do, whatever happens this evening, my hope is that we pass something to not allow the problem to continue on. And I do want to, the last thing I want to, one point is about reducing services. And I've attended all 5 budget meetings. One of them I couldn't listen too much because I was on a different meeting on the South Side. But in short, the consistent theme in all of those meetings is that they actually do want us to figure out how to reduce some things at the same time that we may be asking them, our property owners, or to give more to the city. So I don't see it being such a huge thing to sort of reduce the service and ask more folks who are basically running large businesses to kick in a bit more for services that they've gotten at no cost for a long time. And then one more last thing I want to say is that I appreciate that this doesn't necessarily impact those smaller property owners. So if you're like an 8-unit building, this isn't something that's going to affect you. But if you're a building like my building, or some of the developments in my district where they're basically large businesses that have access to this free resource and creating some headaches along with being able to use this resource. So again, my hope is that whatever comes from this evening, it does not take away our opportunity to sort of like remedy the issue, because unfortunately the folks in my district are having to see what are basically mini junkyards periodically popping up in the district, and from the very same sort of property owners. So whereas in other parts of the city, we may not be dealing with this, in other parts of the district, it needs to be remedied, and remedied quickly and soon. So.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Evers?
Thank you, Mayor. In response to Alder Verveer, it seems to me that there is an issue here where larger property owners and the self-storage companies have shifted the costs of doing business onto the city. You can make that argument. And while historically and structurally, that's the way it's been in the past. But we can also imagine a world, and I imagine there are municipalities that have handled it differently. And I don't know if it's true that there are no services to be able to pick up something like a couch in the private sector. 1-800-GOT-JUNK. There are people out there, whether they have a claw or not, they'll send out some young people or college kids or whatever who will throw whatever you had into a dump truck and take it away. But if businesses have become reliant upon the city to provide this service, and so much so that, when people move out, it's not just a matter of a couch, but it's a lot of items. It's clear that there's, in my mind, and I'll repeat myself, they're shifting the cost of doing business onto the city instead of providing that service, and maybe they need to charge it, have a system of charging it back to the constituent. But we are allowing this to continue, and it sounds like staff is saying we simply don't have the resources to continue to provide at this level, whether we're going for a referendum or not. It's beyond our capacity currently. And so this notion that if we're not already providing trash, garbage, and recycling pickup services for buildings with 9 units or more. I'm not sure why it makes sense that we're providing large item collection for those properties. Seems to me that there are options that could be pursued, and to suggest that there aren't, I just wonder if there isn't just resistance on the basis, well, we've always done it this way, and we don't want it to change, because guess what? We're shifting our cost onto the city, and it's very convenient for us. And I think I agree with staff that maybe it's time for that to end. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Verveer.
Yes, thank you. A couple of other quick things. First, all the years I've been in City Hall, which as we all know is many, the policy has been, and the rationale that that's been shared with me when I've had constituents complain and say that I pay property taxes, why don't I receive streets division services for refuse and recycling, is that the argument is you have to get your material out to the curb. Streets division does not provide dumpster service, for example. If you have a place to store all your plastic carts and everything and bring them out, more power to you. So anyway, I think that's where the policy came from all those many, I guess, generations ago, is can you have your material at the curb or not? And if you can't get it to the curb in a legal way and have it accommodated and service provided by the streets division, we won't provide it. And that's where the policy came from, in my estimation. One area that I didn't mention that I'm extremely concerned about is that this will just proliferate illegal dumping. It wasn't mentioned, but the plan is, as I understand, is talking to the street superintendent, that if the council adopts this change in policy, and our constituents either call one of the street's offices for a large item pickup or attempt to go online in the online reporting system, they will be blocked. They will be told, "Sir, your address is not eligible." It seems to me that, sadly, for a lot in our community, they will simply realize, well, the property next door to me is obviously eligible. It's a building that does receive city service. I'm just going to dump my stuff there in the middle of the night and just give the problem to other neighbors, other property owners. And I'm worried it will provide much more of an appearance of a junkyard in our community. So I appreciate the comments of my colleagues. Mayor, if it's in order, I would like us to consider a motion that I'll make at this point to refer these two agenda items to a future finance committee meeting. In the interim, the two other city committees that are considering this, the building board and the Board of Public Works, can weigh in with their input. But I'd like to have this committee, since fiscal impact is certainly part of the rationale, although not the main impetus, it appears, to be able to look at an alternative at a future meeting. So I would formally move to refer this to a future finance committee meeting.
You, Alder, not sure if the council rule applies here or not, but do you have a date?
Well, I was thinking to allow some time rather than the next meeting, although I certainly wouldn't object to the next meeting. But I was going to suggest our first meeting in July. Am I reading correctly that that's July 22nd? Because of the holidays? Or no, excuse me, July 8th. So Mayor, I would move that we refer these two items to the Finance Committee meeting of July 8th, please.
Thank you, Alder. Is there a second for the motion to refer?
Second.
Moved and seconded to refer. Discussion on referral, Alder Curry?
I don't know if I'm saying this appropriately, but point of information. Can someone share where else this is referred to besides council, or the traction that it's supposed to?
Yeah, I can just quickly respond, but
Go ahead, Alder.
As I mentioned, I don't have the dates in front of me, but the building board, which is all made up of non-elected officials, The building board is the other referral, and then the one that does have two alders serving on it that's also been referred to as the Board of Public Works. So three committees in total, including ourselves. And we're the first committee to hear it.
Thank you, Alder. I guess question back for Madam Mayor. Is it appropriate in committee to be able to add additional referrals or only at council?
You can only add additional referrals at council.
Okay, thank you.
The question is referral to July 8th. Finance. Is there further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, it's been moved and seconded to refer items 11 and 12 to the July 8th Finance Committee meeting. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote? President? All right, so we'll do a roll call. So all in favor of referral to the July 8th Finance Committee meeting, aye. Those opposed, no. As your name is called, and Dave will please call the roll.
Council President Figueroa Cole,
No.
Alder Verveer,
Aye.
Alder Curry,
No.
Alder Madison,
No.
Alder Evers,
Aye.
Alder Rummel,
Aye.
Mayor, that's 3 ayes, 3 noes.
The chair will vote aye. So the item will be referred. But to be clear, I support the underlying proposal. All right, so that takes us to our discussion item, which is item 17, Legistar 83803, the 2025 operating budget cost to continue update. Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. We'll share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. All right, so as you know, we've been talking a lot about the budget over the last few months, and the numbers that we've been using have been from the long-range model, and we have engaged in a process with the agencies to fine-tune where we are at with costs to maintain current service levels in 2025. All right, so we will cover that. That includes revenues and expenditures. What the new gap is now using the, I think a little more precise cost to continue numbers, what the long range looks like with those revisions, and then a little kind of revisiting of the council resolution on the guiding principles for developing the 2025 budget, as well as some of the timelines. So the current estimated gap, is the headline there, is now 22 million as opposed to the 27 million. That's 431 million of estimated expenditures compared to 409 million of estimated revenues. So the expenses are up about 26 million compared to the adopted 2024 budget. It's a little less than a 6.5% increase. We'll get into the details, but most of that is salary and benefits. The Metro subsidy, which is also driven to some extent by salary and benefits. Public health subsidy, which is split with the county. There's a placeholder for debt service based on the adopted 2024 capital budget and the GO debt that will need to be issued to fund that budget. And then purchase services increases. These are maintenance or software maintenance costs. Inflation is hitting those contracts, and that's about $1.5 million. And then there is a reduction in the clerk's office for moving from what this year is a presidential election cycle to the off year cycle. On the revenue side, revenues are about 4 million higher. That includes an estimated allowable levy increase. So that's a combination of the net new construction calculation plus the increase in debt service. There probably will be some revisions to this number because of the repeal of personal property taxation in the state and the replacement of that with aid, and that affects the levy limit calculation. But we don't yet know what that number is from Department of Revenue. It will not increase the amount we can spend. It'll just increase the amount of sort of the net levy with the aid increase. Interest earnings have been stronger. We expect that interest rates will start to decline from current levels by the end of 2025, but nonetheless, it'll be higher than what's in the base by about 6 million. There's some increase in ambulance conveyance fees of $1 million. Some of that is growth in runs, but most of it is a anticipated change in our Medicaid sharing at the state level for ambulance services around the state. And legislation was adopted a couple years ago that directed the State Department of Health Services to develop a program around this. That program has not yet been put into effect. And DHS has been telling ambulance providers that this should go into effect sometime in 2025. So we put some of that in. And then, of course, as we've talked about, the 2024 budget has one-time funding in it, totaling about 18 million, and that's removed in this cost to continue. So dropping that into the long-range outlook, you've seen a version of this graph before, and it just tries to give a sense of that 22 million gap is, every year, unless we solve it permanently, out into the future. And then when we look at 2026, 2027, those numbers above the 22 million is what we expect each year's gap to be when we look at the model in terms of allowable increases in the levy, for example, what's happening with debt service, other revenues compared to the cost to continue current service levels. So you can see that by 2030, we're still, again, in that $60 million range if nothing is done between now and then. So to get into a little more detail on the cost to continue adjustments, personnel, $14.5 million. I'll get into the numbers on a couple of slides to kind of show you precisely how this breaks out. But what it does is it annualizes the 6% general municipal employee increase, which is occurring this year. So 4% was for the entire year of 2024. So that's built into the base. But the second increase is half year. So effectively, there's a 1% unfunded pay increase that needs to be funded in 2025. There's a 3% pay increase in 2025 that's built into cost to continue for general municipal employees. Police commission staff in their collective bargaining agreement already have a 3% pay increase. This would apply that 3% pay increase to all staff. And that cost for the general municipal employees is about $3 million, including benefits for 3%. As we do every year, we built in a step and longevity increase, which is usually roughly 1% of salaries. There were some positions that were created in the 2024 budget for part of the year. We have to fully fund those. There are some position reclassifications that have been submitted to HR, and those have been built in. And then there's a placeholder for health insurance and for Wisconsin retirement system rate increases. Health insurance, right now, the sort of headline number we've gotten from the State Group Insurance Board is an 11% increase in health insurance rates. Now, We expect that number to change because when we sort of take that and run it through the fact that the city pays sort of our shares on the lowest cost plan, we don't know what that increase is yet until ETF, Employee Trust Funds, gives us more data that's not yet available. But we have put in, at this point, the 11% in pay increase. As I talked about earlier, the clerk's office funding for elections is reduced because it's an off year. There's a placeholder for debt service, as I mentioned. We're seeing higher natural gas prices up 15%, electricity up 5%, and then building use charges are up 10%. Those are building use charges from engineering to provide maintenance within city owned buildings. Technology costs, PCI compliance is credit card company requirements in terms of data security, cybersecurity, and there's some cost around that. Maintenance, software maintenance contracts, some significant inflationary increases there, and then credit card processing fees. And then there was some ARPA one-time funding for community agency contracts. That plan was that funding would be picked up in cost to continue in 2025. So that's $1.2 million. The Metro subsidy right now is estimated to be about $18.2 million. That's $2.7 million more than what is in the 2024 adopted budget. $500,000 increase to public health. Again, that's based on estimated costs. We have put in a placeholder of a pay increase, but ultimately that pay increase is set by the county because the public health staff are county employees, and we won't know that until later in the summer. There's also some amount of the public health fund balance that is applied in the cost to continue assumptions to help reduce the levy support that's necessary from both the city and the county. The split of that subsidy between the city and the county is roughly 55-45 based on the equalized value split between the city and the county. The fleet rate, $1.4 million increase. We're purchasing more vehicles, so there's debt there. There's repairs and supplies costs, and then the 3% pay increase rolls through that. There is some decrease in fuel based on current costs. So that's the estimates there for fleet. Insurance and workers' comp. It's a net increase of about $100,000. Large increase in insurance. That's based on claims and premium costs. And then that is almost all of offset except for about $100,000 by a decrease in workers' comp because there's a large balance there. Professional services up about $125,000. Park maintenance. There's some operational costs for completed capital projects. That's $48,000. And then there's costs for these are new shelter facilities, as well as inflation and mall maintenance, about $130,000. And then the Office of the Independent Monitor, it's a relatively new agency. The budget was set based on estimates, and this is kind of a truing up of that budget, taking out some one-time startup funding. So that's a reduction of about $65,000. And then each year we do a cost allocation plan that looks at central costs such as information technology, finance, HR, other central agencies, and then distributes that to the sort of frontline agencies. And based on the distribution of those costs, the enterprise agencies will be picking up more of that cost, which is a benefit to the general fund of about $469,000. So that's a net positive in all this. So we had some questions when we sent the slide deck out. How did we get a $14.5 million increase? So wanted to for salary and benefits. Just wanted to break that down a little bit more. 5.6% increase overall in salary and benefits. As I said, there's a 1% built in for estimated steps and longevity. So that is staff throughout the city based on their tenure in their jobs. They they qualify for longevity at certain points as their career extends. And then some positions move through steps based on experience and skill acquisition. And each year that cost is about 1% increase. So that's $2 million. 3% for all employees is $6 million. And then the benefits, as I said, most of that is in health insurance based on the 11% increase. We also re-estimate benefits for commission staff under their collective bargaining agreements. They have certain retiree health and accidental death and dismemberment insurance that they receive. That re-estimated cost is $430,000. WRS, we have a general estimate of about 1.65 million. We've seen that has increased primarily again for sworn staff or commissioned staff, so police and fire. FICA, 544,000, that's on the pay increase. And then reclasses, COLA benefits, or cost of living adjustments and benefits for hourly, as well as that hits the overtime line and premium pay, about $500,000 overall. So that's the breakdown of that 14.5 million. Just a reminder that the 2024 budget had in it an increase in salary savings. We generally would have a 2% increase prior to 2020, or 2% salary savings prior to 2024. Starting in 2024, we moved the kind of average amount to 3% and used a tiered approach where small agencies had a lower percentage just because they have basically as a share of their salary base less turnover, and then a higher amount for the larger agencies. And you can see how that was distributed. So we've applied that same salary savings methodology to the 2025 salary line, and that generates about 5.6 million in salary savings overall. That's not an increase, but that's the total savings, about 3.2% of permanent wages. The other provision that was in the 2024 budget was a 1% across the board reduction. That total underspend by agency is over the last 3 years has averaged about a little under 4%. So the cost to continue keeps in that 1% savings, and so that's built in already to the 2025 number, and that's a reduction from kind of the base amount of $3.2 million. Just again, this slide is from the presentation that we've been making at the community budget conversations, and just that sort of big picture. We have a $22 million gap. How do we move forward? Clearly on the expenditure side, we just had a robust discussion about services. Where services could be reduced. And then just that reminder, what is now a $22 million gap, that would equate to about 220 positions if it were all done through service reductions. And then on the revenue side, the options are pretty much the possibility of special charges, although we've talked about the difficulty of that with filling the entire gap, and then the referendum, as well as the local revenues like fines and fees, are a small share of our budget, and again, hard to increase those to a level to close the gap that we're talking about. All right, and then just a reminder of the resolution that the council adopted back in April, the values and priorities about maintaining services and preventing layoffs or furloughs, maintaining wage parity, responding to the growth in our city's population, and then trying to look at progressive revenue options in the context of housing affordability. And then on the guidance in developing the 2025 budget, evaluating those service levels, staffing, fiscal impact, seeking ways for efficiencies in operations, Looking at expended reductions in cost to continue that doesn't compromise services, developing referendum language, looking at options other than the property tax on the revenue side, developing a multi-year plan, considering borrowing levels and how that impacts property taxes and the growth rate in them, and then the community engagement plan, which has already been going forward. So we have those values and priorities in the context of what are the next steps. I'll skip capital. We've talked a lot about that. On the operating side, the mayor will have the kickoff meeting that has the priorities for developing the 2025 budget by the agencies. That happens a week from today. Then agencies have roughly the next 5 weeks or so to develop their proposals. Then the mayor works on that executive budget in August, and the budget team prepares that budget for introduction in early October. The finance committee meets in October, and then there's amendments are made in late October, and then the full council acts both through amendment, which are developed that first week of November, and then finally the budget is adopted by the council the second week of November. Now, of course, this year is a little bit different, so we'll drill down a little bit with a more detailed calendar. We're meeting today with this update. As I said, the operating budget instructions will go out to agencies a week from today. We then plan to brief the full council on what you're seeing today, plus what is in those operating budget instructions that go out a week from today. We'll again be back here with the finance committee talking about how do we move forward given the gap and given some of the other timing issues. We'll return to council for another briefing and additional discussion. And as pursuant to that council resolution on guiding principles, that would have to be the point at which a referendum resolution would need to be introduced based on state law timetable requirements. Again, the finance committee meets on July 8th and could discuss that, and the council meets on July 16th. And on August 6th is the last scheduled council meeting before the 70-day deadline for a referendum ballot resolution. Now, that resolution will, that 70 days is probably roughly takes you through late August. And that means that some action needs to be taken if there's going to be a referendum question on the November ballot. Now, under state law, we have to use actual numbers in the referendum question. Those numbers are not available from the Department of Revenue until after August 1st. So we have a very narrow window. I'm meeting with the Department of Revenue in the next week or two to talk about that in more detail. But in looking at other communities and their referendum and the timing of all of that, we hopefully will be able to put before you information to act on precisely on August 6th. But there might be the possibility, if the council wants to proceed with a referendum question, that a special meeting might need to be held in August to meet the state law timeline requirements and the data availability from the Department of Revenue. So with that, that is the end of the slide deck, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Questions for Dave? President Figueroa-Cole?
Thank you, Dave. I just have a very quick question with the numbers changing from what we anticipated last year. Are these numbers like a moment in time, or are we expecting the numbers to change as we reevaluate in the future? Like what's the marker for this particular update?
This is pretty close to final for the cost to continue. As I said, we get sort of final, for example, levy limit information from the Department of Revenue in August. That could change these numbers slightly. We're also waiting for information, for example, from the State Department of Health Services on ambulance fees. That could affect that as well. And then any sort of macroeconomic changes that could affect interest rates, which in effect could impact investment income estimates, could also impact this as well. But this, I would say, is pretty close to these are the numbers we'll be working with now, with probably some tweaking around the edges as we get closer. But this is sort of the best we've got right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Rummel?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Dave, and thanks for providing more detail about the unfunded pay increases, because I admit to being a little bit confused, and this helps, your slide helps explain it. So I guess I have 2 points to make. One is about wages, and it's like $6.1 million in COLA, and I'll just say it out loud. I mean, have we considered not giving anyone a cost of living adjustment, and thus the need to maybe revisit the protective services unions contracts? I mean, it just seems like that should be something that we as a body need to discuss, because it's a big piece of this whole number. And then the second point is more an observation, and that is, like, when you look at the budget guidance we adopted, it doesn't clearly say, you're going to have to cut stuff, but it does say that we should try to reduce expenditures that do not compromise services to residents. Well, after the last discussion on the large item pickup, it just seems really clear to me that pretty much if we do any significant cuts, it's going to compromise services. So that's another thing I just want to put on the table. Like, what does that look like? And are we, talking about that? Because, what I heard from the budget sessions was, you all better look at cuts if you want us to vote for a referendum. And I'm not sure we know what that looks like yet, but I just wanted to raise those points. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. I mean, that is why we're planning to come back to finance to have a conversation about the path forward. There are other questions? President Figueroa Cole? You're muted.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to catch up with another meeting. So I don't know if the elder wants to answer this question, but when we say COLA increases, are we talking about, are we suggesting to look at all of them, and are we allowed to actually back out from the ones that have collective bargaining rights? Are we just specifically talking about the municipal employees, or are all the raises?
So what I heard Alder Rummel say was all of the potential raises, which we are not able to unilaterally alter a contract. We could ask our friends in labor to renegotiate current contracts. I'd say that's a complex landscape, and if they were to even going, I mean, they don't have to agree to reopen a contract. Let me say it that way. And even if we're talking about negotiating contracts going forward, it's a complex landscape, and there's they have a lot of options in terms of their ability to appeal and to ask that we go into arbitration or to the courts, which tend to look at comparable raises that other local governments have given. And I think in that case, we would not come out ahead. But the short answer, Alder, is we can ask, but it's not a guarantee.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Revere, questions?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Dave, for the presentation, and moreover to you and your team for the calculations and work. I simply have a question as to timing, following up on President Figueroa Cole's initial question about timing. You had responded that we'll hear from DOR as to the levy limit calculation in August. Could you likewise share for us what the general timeline is, at least by which months we'd hear from DHS and ETF for their respective figures?
I don't know about DHS. We have asked, our ambulance billing provider has asked. I think everyone around the state has asked, and they have not provided clear timelines other than to say 2025. Regarding the ETF information, we should have that within the next 2 to 3 weeks. That's usually how long it takes them to translate what the actuary provides to the group insurance board into the rate structure for each of the HMO entities, such as courts and Dean and so on. And then so that's, and then for WRS rates, we usually get those sometime in June or July. So it should be within the next few weeks.
Thank you. And then also I was curious, are there any other calculations by the state in terms of state aid that we are awaiting, like from WSDOT or DOA, or are all of those really known, except maybe not down to the specific dollar amount?
We have to use estimates for DOT. That information is often not available until October. And the same with the payment for, or the municipal services payment that we receive from DOA. That's usually later in the fall. For DOR, they have a lot of work to do with the personal property aid that's going to replace the repeal the personal property tax. They also need to, and I don't think that calculation will be available in time to develop local budgets, but the shared revenue amount is now tied to the change in sales tax that's collected by the state. That is not expected to be much funding for Madison, but we have built that into the cost to continue, some estimate of what we think that will go up based on this new approach for shared revenue going forward.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Elder. Other questions for Dave? If not, thank you, Dave. And we will move on to item 18. Item 18 is, I believe, a closed session item. Staff should speak now if they don't want us, if they don't think we have to go into closed session.
We should, Mayor.
Okay. So if I could have someone make the motion to go into closed session, please. President Figueroa Cole.
I need a second, please. Hold on.
And while we're waiting for that motion, just a reminder that if you are not relevant to the discussion regarding negotiations with Starkweather Group LLC and the use of tax increment finance funds for the property at 3450 Milwaukee Street, you can go ahead and leave the Zoom, because that's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the meeting.
Recording in
Standing
progress.
informal. Ariana, just confirm for us when we're back streaming.
Yep, we are back live streaming.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, then, President Figueroa Cole, a motion to go into closed session, please.
Yes, ma'am. When the finance committee considers the following matter, it may go into closed session pursuant to section 19.851(e) of the Wisconsin statute, which reads as follows. Deliberating and negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public businesses whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. If the finance committee does go into closed session, notice is thereby given pursuant to the section 19.852 Wisconsin statute that it may reconvene in open session without waiting 12 hours as specified in the statute.
So, that is a motion to go into closed session. Is there a second?
Second,
Moved and seconded to go into closed session. Requires a roll call. All those in favor of moving into closed session, aye. Those opposed, no, as your name is called, and Dave will please call the roll.
Council President Figueroa Cole,
Aye.
Alder Revere,
Aye.
Alder Curry,
Bye.
People to have community.
Alder Madison,
Aye.
Just downtown.
Alder Evers,
All right.
Alder Rummel.
aye.
Mayor, that's unanimous.
Thank you. All right, so we are moving into closed session. Ariana, thank you, and please take down the stream again.
Okay, will do. Heading out now.
Thank you, and I will
Recording
pause
stopped.
the recording.
Recording in progress.
Let us know when we're back.
Okay, she says we are good to go.
Great. Thank you. All right, so we're coming out of our closed session on item 18 on the Finance Committee agenda, which was a discussion regarding negotiations with Starkweather Group LLC regarding the investment of tax increment finance funds into the development of property located at 3450 Milwaukee Street. And the report out of closed session is that we received a briefing from staff and discussed and then instructed staff on future negotiations. That is the last item on our agenda this evening. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of adjournment? Seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Right.